Hello and welcome back to the AVIAtest Webinar. Our weekly edition will be today talking about air traffic control and especially tower operations. I'm Jeff and I'm happy that you could join us again today. So, first of all, for those who don't know me, I've been an air traffic controller for about 20 years, and the last place where I worked, was at Charleroi Control Tower and Approach Control in Belgium. So I will be your host today, as every week, and together we'll take a look at air traffic control. Okay, so first I would like to thank everybody for watching. We're very, very happy about our audience figures. As every week now we see an increase, and that's very, very encouraging for all of us here at AVIAtest. Okay, so let's dive right into the matter, air traffic control. Okay, before we go into tower or aerodrome control, we'll try and have a broader view, and let's talk first a little bit about why we have air traffic control and what is actually air traffic control. Okay. So, air traffic control is a service that is provided in controlled airspace, of course, and there are 5 main objectives of air traffic control. I'm not going to bore you with the technicalities. Of course, the 2 main goals are to prevent collisions between aircraft in flight or aircraft on the ground, and also between aircraft on the ground and obstructions on the ground. Then there are 3 other objectives, which are, the first one would be, as we say, to expedite and maintain an orderly flow of air traffic, but basically put it in human words, it would mean like regulate traffic as smoothly as possible so that as few people as possible are delayed. Then we also want to provide information to everybody who needs, and also provide emergency services to anybody who might need, and that includes notifying the external services that provide search and rescue or emergency services on an airport, for example, the fire brigade. All right, so let's now continue by taking a look at which services are provided where. Air traffic control can be divided in several branches, if you will, and besides all other considerations, there are air traffic controllers who carry out 3 main different tasks, right? If we take a look at it chronologically, from the moment an aircraft leaves the stand or the gate, the first unit that the pilot will be in contact with would be the tower. Now, the tower, you will see later, is further subdivided into other units or sectors, but the main branch of air traffic control that takes care of aerodrome control is called an air traffic control tower. Now, we've all seen one. For those of you who are not pilots or air traffic controllers, I'm sure that the last time you flew as a passenger, when you arrived at the airport, it's very easy to spot. It's that big tall building. Guess what? It looks like a tower. And that's basically the most visible part of the iceberg, because that's in the common culture, I would say that maybe the first thing that people think about, that the general public would think about when they're being asked, what do you think is an air traffic controller, or what do you think is air traffic control? They would immediately go and think like, that's the tower, that's this tower at the airport. Maybe some will also think, I saw it in the movies, these dark rooms with radar screens, etc. Yeah, okay, that's basically it. Okay, so the first air traffic control branch or unit that you would call when you depart from a controlled aerodrome would be a tower. Then, as the flight progresses, you take off and you change frequency, you change your radio to call another unit, which would be an approach control office. Now, despite the name approach, it can also be used to control aircraft that just departed before they reach their en route phase. We'll see a little later how exactly that works. And then, once the aircraft reaches higher levels and enters an airway, these highways in the sky, then they would call ACC. ACC are the initials of Area Control Center, and that's where most of the en route part of the flight will take place. Okay, to make it a little bit more understandable or a little bit more visual, let's take a look at the airspace. Now, all right. Let's imagine that we have here an airport. There it is. We build our little runway and we put a control tower next to it because we want it to be a controlled airport, of course. When I say that an aerodrome or an airport is controlled, basically, it's also because the airspace is controlled. Not only the airport, but also the airspace around the airport is under the jurisdiction, under the control of the air traffic controllers who work there. The airspace that is located around an airport is called a control zone, or CTR. CTR is the official abbreviation for control zone. A CTR, or control zone, is always controlled by a tower, as we just said. Okay? What is very important to know here is that wherever you'll go in the world, a control zone, or CTR, in some places, like in the United States, you may hear Class Bravo or Class Charlie airspace. That's, they have a slightly different wording for it, but 99% of the other countries, you would hear about a CTR, a control zone. All control zones in the world have one common feature, and that is that they start from the ground. All the control zones start from the ground and then go up. They have a specified upper limit, but the lower limit is always the ground. Above that CTR, we can add another chunk of airspace. Let's get through it. Yeah, okay. And that other chunk of airspace is used in general for aircraft that just departed or are about to arrive or about to land, so that the controllers have a little bit of room to wiggle the traffic around and to put it in a position that is suitable either for joining the upper airspace, for joining the airways, or in a suitable position to carry out an approach to land. Now, that piece of airspace in yellow here is called a terminal area, or TMA. A terminal area is always controlled, or most of the time controlled by an approach control office, as I already mentioned, and it serves both departures and arrivals in many cases. I will hear some of my colleagues here screaming, yeah, that's very nice, but where I work at the tower, and I also take care of the TMA. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes, at certain airports, when the traffic permits or justifies it, the tower can be combined with the approach on one working position. Okay, and then sometimes during the day or because of traffic or if there's any other reason, then it can split again between two different sectors. But okay, these are two of the main possibilities. All right, so now what happens above that? Let's imagine that we have our three little airports, all with a CTR with their TMAs. All right, so that's what we just saw. Above that, here you have some more airspace, and that's where the en route phase of the flight is going to take place. As I said before, this will be under the control of the Area Control Center, or ACC. All right, ACC. If it's too big for one person to handle, then you can see here that it can be divided into different sectors. Okay. It can be divided into different sectors for the use of civilian airplanes, but we can also reserve chunks of airspace for other uses. For example, our friend in the military. Our friends in the military sometimes, basically they're the first owners of the airspace, and they kindly delegate it to the civilians for commercial purposes. But when they are at work, when they're active, there are certain parts of the airspace that normally would be in the jurisdiction of civilian controllers that become military, and therefore it cannot be used for civilian flights. And there's also another chunk of airspace which is called the airways, and it's some sort of a network of, as you can see here, a network of corridors. And this network of corridors is interconnected between all the countries in the world. And so after departure, an aircraft will join the airways and choose the airways that lead him to his destination, where he will again join the TMA, be directed onto the approach, and then will be able to land. Now let's take a look from the side. This is about what it looks like. Now you have here the CTRs, the TMAs above it, the airway that is connected to the TMA so that the airplane can actually depart from the CTR and go into the airway. Some TMAs are not connected to airways. That also can happen. Or also what can happen is that one TMA can serve more airports. In that case, there would be maybe that there can be one controller doing the approach for both airports or for even more. And then the rest of the airspace, as you can see it here, is called the FIR, the Flight Information Region. The Flight Information Region is something that is used, something that generally has the same boundaries as the country in which they are. If the country is too big, for example, Germany or France or Spain, they have several CTRs in the country, so the CTRs are dividing the country. And above flight level 1905, 19,500 feet, we are talking about UIR, or Upper Flight Information Region. Okay. The Flight Information Region is anywhere that people can receive flight information either from Flight Information Center or from a control unit. We'll talk more about Flight Information Center in a later episode. Now, let's take a quick look at a chart here. This is Manchester TMA. You can see all the CTRs in dotted lines here. And in blue, you can see the TMAs. Let's take a look. There are several sectors. You can see here Manchester TMA 1, Manchester TMA 2, and you can see that it serves actually more airports. You can see here Manchester International, Manchester Barton, Liverpool Airport. is served by Manchester TMA. So you see, the organization can be very different from one place to the other. It's been studied for every airport which way would be the most efficient to handle the traffic. This is a map with the airways. As you can see, it can get quite crowded, and there can be quite a few of these airways in the sky. They're also limited sometimes in altitude or in flight levels, so they may not be from the bottom of the FIR to whatever upper level that aircraft can reach. All right. So this is where we go now. Okay. Now, back to the tower. How does a control tower work? A control tower is usually divided, well, can be divided, sorry. Control tower can be divided into several sectors. A control tower takes care of the airplanes once they leave the apron. The apron is not controlled. But once they enter a taxiway, so they leave the apron, they become controlled. The tower takes care of the flight from there all the way to the runway. Then the flight takes off, stays in the CTR, or leaves the CTR either into into uncontrolled airspace or into another controlled airspace, a TMA or something. And the control tower, so the control process starts when the airplane leaves the apron and ends for the tower part when the aircraft is leaving the control zone or is handed over to another controller who works in another airspace. Okay. So, how do we work in practice? Pilots call, of course. Controllers integrate traffic into the integrate the new aircraft coming into their traffic pattern and provide separation. As you remember, I said the objectives of ATC are to prevent collisions between aircraft, and we do that by providing separation. Separation is actually a minimum distance that controllers must respect between two aircraft. That distance can either be vertical or horizontal, can be in time, can be calculated in time or in distance, or, and this is especially the case in a tower, can also be provided visually. So that means that if a tower controller sees both airplanes, he or she can provide visual separation, which is a luxury that the colleagues who work radar sectors, of course, do not have because they can't see the aircraft directly. Okay. For your information, the minimum distance, the minimum horizontal distance that air traffic controllers put between two aircraft varies between 5 and 3, sometimes 2.5 miles, depending on many factors. And also controllers have to take into account the wake turbulence of each aircraft in order to know whether they can put another aircraft short behind or if they have to increase the separation just because it would be too dangerous because of that wake turbulence. Controllers, as you all know, operate by giving clearances and instructions. And in order to give these clearances or instructions, but mostly for clearances, pilots must have a flight plan. Now, I'm already hearing people here telling me, yes, but when I go and fly touch and goes, I don't file a flight plan, or when I just go for a local flight, half an hour outside the control zone, I don't file a flight plan, and then it perfectly works. Yeah, of course, it does. The whole thing behind a flight plan is that it's not only the form that you either fill in on a paper sheet or that you fill in on the internet. Filing a flight plan can also be just calling the controller and saying, okay, here I am, I'm south of your control zone, and I would like to cross your zone to go to the north. All right. This is what we call an abbreviated flight plan. And this is limited information, of course. And this limited information that an aircraft provides is there just for the purpose of obtaining one clearance. So either for crossing a control zone, for departing from an aerodrome and leaving, or from entering the control zone and landing. When you transmit an abbreviated flight plan like this, there are a few elements that are necessary, and they are the call sign, the type of aircraft, the point of exit, point of entry, and the level. Now, I would add on top of the regulation that even though it's strictly reserved for VFR flights, abbreviated flight plans can only be passed by VFR flights. I would still mention in a contact with air traffic control that this is a VFR flight. For example, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta VFR flight from Alpha to Bravo, Cessna 172, entering via south 2,000 feet. That would be a good initial call. Okay. How do we handle that? Well, we handle that by creating a flight plan for you, a small flight plan, and we write that down on a paper strip. Now, what is a paper strip? Let's take a look together. It's that thing. And as you can see, there are lots of different instructions, different information, different pieces of information written here. And if you go to different airports, you will always see different types of strips, different type of flight progress strips. Because, okay, every country or every ANSP, every air traffic control provider have their own standards to adhere to. Paper strips, or flight progress strips as we see here, are also a little bit quaint, and in some airports, in many airports actually, they are not in use anymore, or they're only used as a backup, because now we have electronic strips which are displayed on a computer monitor. And as you can see here, this gentleman, we can even, in some cases for the better systems, just drag and drop the strips wherever we want, like we would do with a paper strip. It's very, very handy to do that. Okay. Let's very quickly talk about the different types of planning that air traffic control requires. And I would summarize it as there are three main stages of planning. The first stage of planning in air traffic control service is the strategical planning, which is the long-term decisions, the procedures. How do aircraft enter into a CTR? How many sectors will there be? All these kind of regulations or long-term measures taken and that are not to change every day. Then there is a pre-tactical. Pre-tactical means that every day or every night or twice a day before every shift, the supervisor or the senior controller will take a look at the operational condition of the aerodrome, if anything is closed, what the weather is going to be like, even the traffic forecast, and then we'll decide on different measures to be followed, to be adopted. And that would be, for example, how many sectors will they open, or if they will, as we call, collapse one or more sectors together. And then there is the tactical planning, which happens usually something like in a tower 40 seconds, 30, 40 seconds ahead of time. And that's where the controller himself or herself will make his or her own depiction of the traffic to come in the next 30 seconds. How is the situation going to evolve? And this is actually where you as a pilot can help air traffic control. If you are efficient in your communication, if you call ahead, if you're calling air traffic control before entering a control zone, for example, that's a good practice, and that's what's going to enable the controller to build a mental image, a mental depiction of the evolution of the traffic, because it's a job that is constantly evolving. So that's how you can help air traffic controllers, by being efficient in the way you talk, not hogging too much frequency time, and also by trying to be a little bit ahead of your aircraft. I hope you understand what I mean, but by that I mean that you don't react to what your airplane is doing. You have to be the one in control of the airplane, and you have to know in the next 2 or 3 or 5 minutes how you're going to lead your flight. Okay? This is very important. Okay. Now, what's going to happen in the future with air traffic control? Maybe you've actually seen things about that, articles or documentaries even, but air traffic control towers may be disappearing in a short future, to be replaced by smaller units, or not necessarily smaller, but by grouping the air traffic controllers of more airports into one place. We all know what a control tower looks like. This is a picture of Brussels National Airport Air Traffic Control Tower in Belgium. And this very typical shape of an air traffic control tower may be in the future, close or distant, replaced by something like this, where instead of putting air traffic controllers on site at the airport, they will have camera feeds from the airport on which they are working, and that will be displayed, as you see here, on a set of screens exactly positioned like the windows of the control tower. So it will look like the controller is actually working at the airport. One of the advantages is, of course, enhanced reality. You could display things on these screens that you wouldn't do on normal windows. You could display little labels flying around with the airplanes. That could be handy. Okay. Now, we've been through a broader explanation of air traffic control. Then we talked about the tower. And it's time now for the questions from the audience. Welcome back. So, on this AVIAtest webinar, as usual, we will be taking a few questions from the audience. Once again, thank you for submitting them. It's a real pleasure. And the first question comes from Philip in Belgium. Philip asks us, can the tower force me to land on a runway that I don't want? Well, that's very easy, Philip. And the answer is no. No. If you take a look at the EASA Standard European Rules of the Air, or SARA, which have been ratified in the EASA countries. SERA 2015, if I remember correctly, tells us that the pilot in command of an aircraft shall have the final authority as to the disposition of the aircraft while in command. So it means that you, as a pilot in command, are the final decision maker, because you're the one who's responsible ultimately for the safety of the flight. So if the controller tells you, okay, you're going to have runway 17, and you say, no, I want runway 35 because of this or this or that, you will have your wish. Please note that even though you will have it, it may take a while to coordinate it. It may take a while to arrange it for you, because if you make the request last minute and there's a lot of traffic, well, you are not going to have a full priority, because since we have to change runways just for you, we're going to try and maximize the airport capacity and find the right moment to let you land on that runway. Of course, if that means that you're a little bit concerned with your levels of fuel, once again, as we said in previous installments, you have to say something. Okay? The second question is coming from Clara in the area of Munich, Germany. And Clara is asking us, if an airport is controlled at night, does it mean that there are no controllers in the tower? What if I call? Well, Clara, it's generally the case. I mean, it depends. It depends because there are restrictions, there are regulations. It depends on the arrangement of the airport, etc., etc. There are many factors here to take into consideration. There may be some airports where controllers stay in the control tower 24/7, even though the airport is closed at night. I worked in an airport like that. They may have to watch over airspace that does not close. Only the airport is closed, but for example, the TMA or the control zone stay active. That's very possible. Or they may be there for safety in case an airplane has a distress situation and needs to land quickly. So really, if you try and call an airport that is closed, most probably you will not get a response unless you're in an emergency. Okay, Torgny from Svedala in Sweden is asking us how many controllers work at the same time in a control tower. Well, again, it depends on many things. It depends on the quantity of traffic, for example. It depends on the size of the airport, on the size of the tower, how many sectors there are. If the approach is done from the tower, for example, or even if there are more runways, there can be more controllers. If the airport is open 24/7 on only part of it, there can be many situations. There are airports who have one controller present at a time. I'm thinking, for example, the Shetland Islands in the UK have very small airports where one controller does all the air traffic control plus even the MET observations, the weather observations. So there's really no rule of thumb because it depends on many things. Next question comes from Hugues in Belgium. Hello, Hugues. Can I request a QDM, for example, Sierra, so I'm assuming here a visual reporting point, or only for an airport? Okay, that's a very good question. And the answer is neither of those, actually. When you request a QDM, and a controller will give you one, hopefully, the QDM will always lead you to the receiving station of the controller's radio. So it means that controllers have the controller's radios have an antenna somewhere at the airport, and the QDM equipment, which is called the goniometer, is connected to that antenna only. Whenever you receive a QDM, it will always be for that point on the airport. Now, what's important is that controllers are not allowed, in theory and in ICAO considerations, to issue radar vectors to VFR flights. Yes, hello. I'm sorry, the dog is here again. Like every week, he likes his minute of fame. So, controllers cannot issue radar instructions or radar vectors to VFR flights, because if we take you out of your way, and we take you out of your way so far that you get lost, then it will be the controller's fault if you're lost, and we don't want that to happen. So we do not issue VFR flights with radar vectors, which means that we can't tell you to go, we can't guide you anywhere but with a QDM, which means, of course, to the QDM receiver, which is the airport in general. There, I hope that that clears it up for you. And the last question for today is coming from Peter in Czech Republic. Is air traffic control as stressful as it is made out to be? That's a question that I've had a lot throughout my career, and even now when I meet people and I say I used to be a controller, they all ask me like, oh, is it really as stressful as they show in the movies or as they say in the media? Well, not really, no, thankfully. One of my old instructors used to say that air traffic control was 90% boredom and 10% panic. Now, of course, it's a little bit an overstatement, all right? It's exaggerated quite a bit, but yeah, I understand the thought behind it. The thing is that for most of the time, most of the job you do as an air traffic controller, you've been trained extensively. You've received extensive training to do what you're doing. So it's something that everybody can, that everybody can understand. That if you've been trained to do something a lot, then it becomes an easy job. Also, you're provided with all the best equipment, hopefully, to do it. So it also reduces the level of stress. Now, of course, I'm not saying that it's always a pleasure, it's always a walk in the park. Sometimes there are situations that can actually turn out quite tragic, and that can raise the level of stress quite significantly, but thankfully this does not happen too often. In the meantime, we did receive one extra question from Nicola. Hello, Nicola. And Nicola says, I get confused about the CTA abbreviation. Could you tell me more about it? Hello, Nicola. Thank you for sending in your question. And yes, I didn't talk about CTA because that's not very common, to be honest. There are CTAs in the airspaces. Yes, that's okay. A CTA is the abbreviation for control area. Control area would be a chunk of controlled airspace that does not start on the ground, but from a lower limit, and that goes to an upper limit. And a CTA can be a TMA, or a CTA can be an airway, or a CTA can just be a CTA. It's some sort of big ensemble of things, of portmanteau word, if you will. For example, all the TMAs, if you want to see it like that, all the TMAs are CTAs, but all the CTAs are not TMAs. So TMAs can only be CTAs, but CTAs can also be other things like airways or like just CTAs. Okay? In any case, a CTA is always controlled airspace, control area, And whenever you want more details about it, you can consult the AIP, where you will find all the details about who controls it, what language is to be used with the controllers. That is very important, because if you fly abroad, for example, there may be airfields where English is not spoken. Normally on controlled aerodromes it happens nowhere, but whenever you go to the AIP and you look up the communication facilities of an air traffic services unit, you will always see in which language you can address them. All right, well, that wraps it up for today, folks. I'm happy that you came to see us. Bobby is also very happy, as every week, to see you. Say hello, Bobby. And once again, the webinar of today will be made available online on our YouTube channel, so that for the people who didn't have the chance to catch it all, or who wants to see it again, it will be available to watch in a few hours from now. Once again, thank you very, very much for your fidelity, for your trust. And we hope to see you next week with another interesting subject, which will be posted both on our website and on our Facebook profile. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Have a nice week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and until next Sunday. Bye-bye.